Hi, good evening. Welcome to the Salt Lake City Planning Commission meeting for March 26th, 2025. Please note our public meeting rules are posted at the entrance to this room or in Section D of the Planning Commission Policies and Procedures. If you've submitted comments on an application to a planner or to your community organization, we have received those. If you want to make a comment this evening, you can fill out a comment card, which are at the door to this room, or you can send an email to planning.commission@slc.gov. Okay, the first item on our agenda tonight is the report of the chair, and I wanted to let you know that we're seeking applications for planning commissioners from Salt Lake City District 4 and 5. You can search for the Salt Lake City Planning Commission online, and at the bottom of the page there's a Becoming a Commissioner line, and you can fill out an application there. So please do that if you live in District 4 or 5 or you're interested in the things that we talk about. Now is a report of the Vice Chair.
I have nothing to report. Thank you.
Thank you. Now is the report of the Planning Director.
The only update I have is a couple meetings ago, the commission asked about the council's action on the R1 study and initiating something. And at that meeting the day before, they had postponed that item from discussion. And so at one of their last few meetings, they actually did initiate a text amendment to look at that. So we're going to be starting that process, and we'll keep, obviously, there's going to be a high profile type of project. So our team's working on a work plan right now. We'll bring details throughout the life of that project, so you're not just seeing it when you have a briefing down the road and things like that, so we can identify concerns and issues early and cater our process to some of those things. Just want to let you all know that.
Thank you. Now it's time for open forum, where commissioners can discuss planning, zoning, or general land use items that are not listed on the agenda. If you have anything you want to discuss. Okay. Oh, go ahead. Oh, okay. I was so excited. I love open forum. Somebody say something. Okay, we'll go to the consent agenda, which these are matters we anticipate will require limited discussion. We have one item on the consent agenda. It's a design review and plan development at approximately 523 West, 200 North. We also have approval of meeting minutes on the agenda, but we don't have any minutes tonight, so it's just the one item. What we can do tonight is approve all of the items on the consent agenda or move some to the regular agenda. I'm going to open the public hearing for that item. If anyone wants to speak on the Boyer District project, you can approach the podium now. Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing. And ask for a motion from the commission.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve the consent agenda from Commissioner Christensen and a second from Commissioner Krasik. Any discussion? Okay, we'll vote. Commissioner Leverett.
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer.
Yes.
Commissioner Berry.
No on the design review, and yes on the plan development.
Commissioner Christensen.
Yes.
Commissioner Scott.
Yes.
Commissioner Krasik.
Yes.
And I'll also vote yes, which means our consent agenda passes. Thank you for that. Now we're on the regular agenda. Our first item on the regular agenda is a zoning text amendment for downtown parking garage design standards. And we'll have the staff introduce themselves and present this project.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Riley Hall, and tonight I am presenting a zoning text amendment to the parking regulations in the downtown zoning districts. This amendment was initiated by the mayor at the request of the Planning Division, and its purpose is to clarify the applicable standards, eliminate conflicting code language, and to support the adopted plans that apply. And to support the adopted plans that apply to the downtown area, Plan Salt Lake, the Downtown Master Plan, and the North Temple Boulevard Master Plan. All of these plans emphasize the importance of people-focused development. The Planning Division has recently received several text amendments. The Planning Division has recently reviewed several text amendments that were processed at the same time, but they were adopted at different times. And as a result, the parking regulations that apply in the downtown zoning districts are in 3 different sections of code. This text amendment aims to reorganize those standards so they are easier to understand for developers and easier to administer for city staff. The overall intent of these standards, which is to screen parking garages and to limit parking at the street level or in front of buildings, is not changing. The zones that will be affected by this text amendment are the D1, D2, D3, D4, and GMU zoning districts, and the map on the right shows the location of these zones. The goals and policies of the adopted plans for the goals and policies of the adopted plans for the downtown zoning districts are intended to facilitate pedestrian-oriented uses and design. However, there are some parking or auto-oriented uses that may be appropriate, especially if they have design centers that make them more compatible. So, for example, as stated in these plans, parking garages may be appropriate, especially if there are design centers like screening and active ground floor uses. Some parking lots may also be appropriate. They would be even more appropriate if there are size and location requirements for them. And in general, large surface parking lots are incompatible with pedestrian-oriented environments because they can cause significant negative impacts to the pedestrian experience and visual character of downtown. Currently, as written in the code, parking is prohibited as the only use of a property if it is the result of a building demolition. So parking garages, if they have frontage on a public street, are already required to have active ground floor uses. So they would not be the only use of a property, but this standard is an issue for parking lots, especially because the standard is somewhat easy to circumvent. For example, if a property owner were to demolish a building today and then apply for a building permit next year for a parking lot, it would be difficult for city staff to say that the parking lot was a result of the building demolition. So, to fix this issue, staff is proposing to only allow surface parking lots if they are co-located on a property with a building, and they may only be located either behind the building or to the side of the building. And if the parking is located to the side of the building, staff is proposing additional provisions that would limit the size of the parking lot and its proximity to the sidewalk. Staff is also proposing to change some of the design standards that apply to parking garages. Currently, any new construction or additions to existing buildings in the downtown zoning districts are required to comply with a number of design standards. These include things like ground floor active uses, glass, building materials, building entrances, maximum lengths for blank walls or street-facing facades, and there are a number of other requirements. Parking garages are also required to comply with another specific set of standards for them. And so requiring both of these sets of standards has presented some conflicts that we are trying to fix as part of this text amendment. So currently in the code, parking garages on upper levels are required to be wrapped by a use other than parking, but the code does not specify which uses would be appropriate, It also doesn't specify a minimum depth for these uses, so a use such as a stairwell or a hallway or storage would be enough to meet this requirement. Upper levels of parking garages are also required to provide up to 50% glass on the building facade, and of the remainder of the building that is not occupied by glass, up to 70% of the building facade must be composed of durable building materials such as stone or brick or fiber cement or something similar to that. So when all of these design requirements, oh wait, let me go back real quick. There is also another set of building material requirements that applies specifically to parking garages. So the code does not specify which set of building material requirements apply when a parking garage is incorporated into a building. So when all of these standards are applied at the same time, it makes it very difficult to have a parking garage on upper levels of a building because there's very little room, if any, left over on the building facade for things like ventilation. It also raises costs of building materials, which can be passed on to any residents of the building. And all of these factors may encourage a developer to explore other options, such as surface parking at the ground level. So, to fix these issues, staff is proposing to remove the requirement that upper levels of parking garages must be wrapped by a use other than parking. The ground floor use requirements are not changing with this text amendment. Staff is also proposing to remove the glass requirement that applies to the upper levels of parking garages. And finally, staff is proposing to modify the building materials requirement to clarify which set of building material design standards takes precedence when applied to parking garages that are incorporated into a building. Staff is recommending that the Planning Commission forwards a positive recommendation to the City Council to approve the proposed text amendment. And that is my presentation. I can take any questions or comments.
Thank you. Since we don't have an applicant, I'm going to hold questions until we do our discussion. So I want to do the public hearing now. So if anyone wants to speak on this text amendment, you can approach the podium now. Or if we have any new emails. Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing. What we can do today is make a positive recommendation to the Salt Lake City Council, a negative recommendation to the City Council, or we can continue this item to another date with or without the continuation of the public hearing. It's time for a discussion.
One question I had on, excuse me. One thing I wasn't 100% clear on is, so with the new requirements for how much can be open, is the area that can be open, does that still require some kind of screening on top of that, or is it just completely open?
There is screening requirements that will be required in addition to that. So open meaning it can be like a metal gauge material or something that is just not 100% solid, but there are still requirements that would apply to those areas.
Okay. So I know that there's a part that says like it has to be screened so that you can't see the cars, but that could be kind of a pony wall or whatever. But you're saying that like if there's an open space above that, there still has to be some kind of like metal screen or something over that.
Yeah, 100% of the building facade is required to be screened. So there is that specification that only 50% can be open. Those areas are still required to have a screen, even if they are partially open.
The reason I ask about that is just because So in the IBC, it separates out open parking garages and closed parking garages, and most places will do open ones, which basically means that the air circulates through them, right? And that's why there's that certain amount of opening. With how the code is written, does that still allow open parking garages then? Because it just doesn't.
No. Yeah, they're required to be screened. So by open, we mean like there is a building material that has open parts in it. It can't be like a half wall and then the remainder of the building is just open to the air.
So maybe I can help with this a little bit too. The way this is written, it gives us some flexibility in determining what that means. So where it's really critical is on parking garages that don't have the sides or rears, where they can be fully open so we don't have to mechanically vent those types of garages. Mm-hmm. But when it's facing a street, there needs to be some sort of a screen. It can be perforated, it can be louvered. We've seen some where they've made openings that look like windows, but there's nothing in there. Those kinds of things would be perfectly acceptable, as long as it's, it doesn't have to completely hide the cars, but the intent is to reduce the visibility of the vehicles.
Okay. So there's some flexibility in that design on the street-facing side, and then the more realistic possibility for getting classified as an open garage is just from other sides of the building that aren't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where it's harder, corner properties, buildings with double or triple frontages, right now, for example, the Delta Center's going through a process to build a parking garage that's attached to the Delta Center. And because the walls of that garage will be at 45-degree angles to the street, we're trying to figure out, is that actually facing the street or not? And, and so they're battling with how to figure out how to do that. And, it's something that we have with some of these large assembly types of uses that do need to provide some parking and things like that, so.
Yeah, I bring it up just in part of the staff reports talking about like trying to prevent kind of ballooning costs for residential units based on that. And probably the biggest way that they do that with parking is by going to an open parking system instead of a closed one, because it means that you don't have to ventilate and do HVAC for space that's really just cars and occasionally a person walking through, and you absolutely have to do sprinklers instead of sometimes you do or don't. So I wanted to make sure that there is a path to allowing open garages, because that, like, in terms of driving down the cost and it not being necessary, that's probably one of the biggest kind of cost savings. So, okay, thanks.
So am I correct that we're changing, when we say parking location and design, we're not just talking about vehicles, we're also talking about bicycles?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, this sound system is weird tonight. Okay. So one of the amendments seems to suggest that we're not only when we're talking about the location of parking behind and to the side, we're also talking about bicycle parking. So you can't put bicycle parking in the front of a building?
I believe it would still be allowed. I don't think there's anything that would prevent it.
It says that in line 205 in the actual document, the actual text amendment document.
Let me look at that real quick.
Because I would not want to classify bicycle parking the same as automobile parking or loading or vehicle parking.
This requirement is specific to the location and design standards that are in 21A 44060. So
I'm sorry, I can't understand you. Can you get
Yeah.
really close?
The changes in that section are specific to 21A 44060, which is the off-street parking and loading chapter. So those are separate requirements from these parking requirements that are specific to the downtown zoning districts. These are requirements that are restricting parking either behind the building or to the side, or only for parking lots and only in the downtown zoning districts. So bicycle parking will not be affected.
Okay. Missing something about this?
No, it's just in a different section of code.
Okay. Where in the code do we require the location of bicycles to be somewhere besides the,
So those changes are proposed to be added to both 21A 30.010 and 21A 31.010, and those are the general provisions that are specific to the D1 or D1 through 4 zoning districts, and then the 21A 31 is the GMU zoning district. So those standards are specific to only those zoning districts, and it won't affect the parking requirements or bicycle parking location requirements that currently exist in 21A 44, which is the off-street parking and loading chapter. Also, just to add to that, these specifications are specific only to parking lots, it has nothing to do with bike parking.
I think
Well, I mean, it does say in here, it says.
Hang on. I think I can help with this. So that section 21A 44020 is a general section that talks about how all of 21A 44 applies. So there's specific sections about the number of vehicle stalls, bicycle parking, the location of parking lots, things like that. So not every provision in 21A 44 would apply to bicycle parking, only those that are specific to bikes. So there's a section, let me bring it back up, in the 21A 44040, which is required off-street parking, where bicycles are listed, and there's no real specific location requirements mentioned in the code that apply to bikes. All the location requirements are specific to vehicle parking.
I'm reading.
Sorry. How much flexibility do you have to approve or disapprove? I didn't think about this until right now, so I'm sorry I didn't come prepared with a particular site. But the co-location rule that only allows a parking structure, a street level parking structure, to be behind or adjacent to a building. How much control do you have over whether an owner works with another property owner to sort of combine properties to sort of increase parking?
Could you give me an example?
So I'm trying to think of a lot, and I'm only thinking of, I don't know, something adjacent to 300 South right now. A lot where they would otherwise be a surface-only lot, but they're adjacent to a building that didn't have parking before, and they rather only use it for parking, and so they create a joint venture and say, hey, now we're this same property now. We're behind this building, or we're adjacent to this building. I'm not saying that this is set to be exploit that, but how much control do you have? Do you have the necessary control to prevent that in this?
So let me make sure I understand. To prevent somebody from combining properties, one of them which would be like an existing parking lot.
Or potential parking lot
Or
with an
potential
existing
parking
building,
lot.
where otherwise
Yeah.
a parking lot wouldn't be allowed. Yeah.
Yeah, so I do think we have appropriate controls to limit that parking lot. It's going to be a little different based on the different downtown zones, because there are different regulations as far as what setbacks are and things like that. But if it's an existing parking lot, we're probably not as concerned about it versus building a new parking lot. The new parking lot would, even if it is one, they couldn't just propose it as a standalone use to build it. So they would have to combine it. And then when they submit a building permit, there would be that zoning review to make sure that that parking lot complies with all the standards. So that would be our control point to ensure that they comply with that.
So in that case, I buy a small building, I demo it, I want to make a surface lot. It's not allowed under the ordinance, but if I go to the adjacent building owner, I can say, hey, let's create a joint venture and I'll apply for my surface lot as part of your building. We share the revenues and I move forward.
Yeah, so that'd be a shared parking agreement, which our code allows. They have to commit to certain terms that are outlined in our code for shared parking. Shared parking can be off-site. So there is an avenue in our code to support that kind of thing. And we actually would prefer shared parking versus everyone building their own new parking lot when we know we have an excess of private parking downtown.
So does that limit your control overall on surface lots, or you're okay with that?
Yeah, so if it's off-site parking, it has to be within that parking lot has to be within a certain distance of the use it's supporting. And so, yeah, we're comfortable with that, with those regulations.
A tiny question. With that co-location of a building with the parking lot, is there regulations stating how large that building has to be able to like qualify as a co-located use, or could it be just like a little shack for taking tickets or something?
There's no minimum size requirement, but there is for the parking lot. The maximum size of the parking lot is 40 stalls, depending on whether it's located to either behind or to the side of the building. It may also be located to one row of parking. So no, there are not requirements for the size of the building, but there are for the parking lot.
If there's no more questions, I'm ready to make a motion.
Okay.
Based on the information presented and discussion, I move that the commission recommends that the city council adopt the zoning text amendment.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Commissioner Christensen and a second by Commissioner Scott. Any discussion? Let's vote. Commissioner Shear,
Yes.
Commissioner Barry,
Yes.
Commissioner Scott,
Yes.
Commissioner Leverett,
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Krasik.
Yes.
I'll also vote yes. So we'll send a positive recommendation to the city council on that zoning text amendment. Thank you. All right, now we're on other business, and our next item is Walkable SLC.
had it backwards. Hello, my name is Noah Elmore, Associate Planner, and I am here to discuss Walkable SLC. What is Walkable SLC? It's very much not a motorcycle. So, Walkable SLC is a tool developed by planning staff to visualize walkability to essential amenities such as grocery stores, parks, schools. Walkability is an important factor in promoting public health, reducing environmental impacts, and supporting the local economy. All of these different elements come together to improve the quality of life for residents of Salt Lake City. Walkable SLC will aid in identifying and improving existing areas and the car-dependent areas of the city. So, how did we get here? How was this tool created? For our first step, we identified those amenities that could be considered essential. Here, you can see a list of the 15 amenities we identified. This list includes things like childcare, grocery stores, schools, public transit, etc. Highlighted here as an example in gold there is our grocery stores category. So you can see on the map to your right, it might be a little hard to tell on this image here, but those are nice little shopping cart icons. So each of those icons represents a grocery store in Salt Lake City. So then for step 2, for all of those little icons you just saw, we mapped a 15-minute walking path or walk shed for all 15 of those amenities. Here on this map, you can see our grocery stores, and this sort of red-orange area represents the 15-minute walk shed for all of those grocery stores. So in other words, if you are located within this red-orange area, you are within a 15-minute walk to a grocery store. So then our third step, we repeated that process again. We took the walk sheds for all 15 of those amenity categories. We overlaid them and counted them. So for example, here, this bright yellow you see with Sugar House, there are 15 amenity categories. They all overlap there. So in other words, sort of the hotter this map is, the more walkable it is. The cooler it is, the less walkable it is, until it becomes a more car-dependent area. So we're gonna try an interactive portion. I think this is the first time anyone's done something interactive. We gotta get a link. Okay. So here you can see our page. This is available online on the planning website. We have our different categories here of tabs, the background I just explained to you. Some instructions for those at home or for yourselves later. And then here is our map. So you can see here, this is sort of the opening page. So on just this opening page here, as an example, you can see, similarly, here's our basic heat map where we overlaid all those walk sheds. We took that and applied it to the block level. So you can see how this applies to various blocks in Salt Lake City. So for example, we can go here on this block and you can click on it and it'll load up and it'll tell you how many of those different amenity types are within a 15-minute walk. We can see 13 here with a 15-minute walk of 451 South State. And then it'll also tell you, lists each category here, and it'll tell you a bus stop is within 15 minutes. Childcare is within 10 minutes. Where it's blank, for example, like with hospitals, there's no hospital within 15 minutes, but there is a library within 5 minutes. So you can do that at the block level. And then we took it a little further, and we also have it at the parcel level. So you can skim through, and we have every parcel in the city that this is applicable to. And you can zoom in, click here, for example, and we have the address. And similar to the block, you can see at the parcel level the number of amenities within 15 minutes. And that similar data, there's no grocery store within 15 minutes of this address on 13th East. And then we also include additional zoning data, the zoning district, acreage, overlays for reference for those interested, and along with a legal description. But beyond that, we have a little more broader data, such as our walkability index. I know this looks like a lot at first, but essentially, this is 3 categories. The darkest blue is most walkable, the middle blue is somewhat walkable, and the lighter blue is sort of our least walkable area. This was made where we would weight different categories and different amenities to try to really hone in beyond a raw number and more contextualize it to show, well, what areas feel the most walkable. And this is sort of our effort to help illustrate that with this. We also have tree canopy data from 2012, and you can break that down according to plan area. So for example, here's the avenues, and then we also have the 2024 tree canopy data, so you can compare past years and you can see how that's grown. You can compare the avenues with the Northwest. Then we have our amenity categories I mentioned earlier. You can customize this, if you want to look at, for example, just grocery stores, you can do that, but you could also be like, well, what grocery stores are there near the childcare? How close are those to each other? Are there grocery stores and parks near each other? So you can kind of customize that according to how the situation demands, what you're interested in at the time. We have our city council districts, community council districts. For reference, proposed mid-block walkways, all the sidewalks and on-road bikeways are also mapped and included in this. So you might recall the grocery store walk sheds I mentioned. You can pull that up for grocery stores, healthcare facilities, and you can have multiple layers on at a time. And you can even take basic heat map here. You can turn that on and you can see, okay, this is the part where the grocery stores fit in, or for example, where the parks fit in. So you can see how the different walk sheds individually fit into the bigger picture. So then we also have density data here to help illustrate at the block level where are our densest blocks in the city. And similarly, we have dwelling units per acre as well. And then finally, we just have our standard and familiar zoning map. So what did we do with all of this data? We created profiles analyzing every plan area except City Creek. It's not the most walkable or inhabited. These profiles include, going to start clockwise and go counterclockwise, and a walkability map, a list of all amenity categories and how accessible they are by walking in terms of a percentage, a detailed analysis of the amenities for the plan area, along with an analysis of the amenity gaps for that area. And finally, in the top right there, a chart listing out the amenities for that plan area and then comparing it with the greater citywide data for reference. So just finally, a little background on our methodology for this. We made an effort to be as comprehensive as possible in analyzing our identified essential amenities. To that end, instead of using data from an open source such as Google, we used the city's own business license records as our data source. This involved analyzing and reviewing thousands of business licenses to ensure we not only captured as many data points as possible, but that the data itself was as accurate as possible. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Andy Holka.
All right, thanks. Maybe I'll grab the mouse. All right, so now that you kind of know how we put the maps together, I'm going to walk you through a few highlights and examples. Sorry, I had to. So, on your screen, we have a map showing the Sugar House Plan area. As Noah mentioned, we did community profiles for every neighborhood with an analysis of the access to the different amenities in those neighborhoods. We wanted to, on this map, this is showing the block level data where the purples and blues are the less walkable and the warmer colors leading up to yellow are the more walkable areas. In Sugar House, you can see the area around the Sugar House Business District is that yellow color, which means that those parcels are within walking distance of all 15 amenity types that we measure. So, Sugar House had a lot of parcels, in fact, entire blocks that had access to all 15 that were measured. Another highlight is the avenues. This is the parcel level map that's zoomed in a little bit. So we have 1st through 4th Avenue and A through H Street on your screen. And so other than Sugar House, these were the only other parcels that had access to all 15 different amenity types. It's hard to see with this color. The avenues is very walkable. They're all have access to a lot of amenities, but there are a few that had access to all 15. One way that the tool can be used is to identify where gaps exist. So for example, in downtown, you can see if you look down this middle row of percentages, almost every category was at or near 100%, which means that nearly 100% of parcels downtown have access to that category. The gap in downtown is the hospitals. As you can see, 0%, there's no downtown hospital. And that's something that the Planning Commission recently had to deal with. So this tool would have been useful as you were reviewing the rezone proposal for the new downtown hospital. It supports the need for zoning that would allow that amenity to be in this area. Another gap we found was in Central City. Central City has the lowest library access of any of the neighborhoods in the city. So that's another example how this data that we've compiled can inform decision making. Our analysis supports Ballpark Next proposal to include a community center and library in the area. This is an area that is in desperate need of a new library. As Noah mentioned, we also included data about tree canopy coverage that you can review as you're looking at different neighborhoods. This screenshot shows the area east of the freeway from 13th South to 21st South. You can see pretty clearly that there are fewer trees along 300 West. Yet again, supporting some of the recommendations from a recent project that the Planning Commission has been working on. The 300 West Corridor and Central Point Station Area Plan calls for adding new street trees along the corridor and makes recommendations about open space and vegetation. Another project that's headed your way soon is an update to the Northwest Plan. Our team will be working on that this year, and you'll have an opportunity to discuss that. We'll be using this data as we do that analysis. As you look at this, what we've done is for all of the neighborhoods, we have the citywide average and the statistics for that specific neighborhood and the difference. So if you look at the differences, you can see in the Northwest area, which includes Rose Park and Fair Park areas, most of those amenities are less accessible to residents in this neighborhood. And so that's something that should be addressed as we update our long-range plans. This area also includes the Power District, which we're expecting redevelopment. And so it's important that as we're reviewing these projects and planning for the future, that we address those gaps that exist. Specifically here, healthcare, hospitals, pharmacies, and recreation are significantly less accessible in this neighborhood. Another example of a project that you've been working on recently that this could apply to is the RMF amendments. In a recent meeting, the commission reviewed this proposal and sent it back to staff to do a little bit of closer analysis to understand which areas should be RMF 35, which areas are appropriate for RMF 45. So our team's going to use the walkability data as they do that block by block analysis to ensure that the RMF properties that are in the more walkable areas have the appropriate designation. And that should be coming back to you shortly as well. And then one last example we wanted to share. This data can be used in a lot of different ways, as you've already seen, but not only for planning purposes, but other departments in the city are interested in using this data as well. Our sustainability team's interested in understanding access to grocery stores. So this example shows the avenues, Smith's on 6th Avenue. It shows the 15-minute walking distance to that grocery store overlaid over our dwelling units per acre layer. You can see that many of the blocks that are outside of the walkshed are developed with medium to high density housing. But as we analyze, if we compare that to the zoning map, you can begin to see at least potentially one reason why there may not be additional stores further east. The one grocery store that exists in the avenues, you can see there, is that one red block that's surrounded by residential zoning. It's in the community business zone. The areas further to the east do not have similar commercial zoning that would allow that type of use. So again, just one of many different ways that you can toggle the different layers on and off. You can analyze different neighborhoods, different projects, whatever you're working on. We did not develop this tool just for one specific reason, but we hope that it'll be a useful tool to inform your decisions on a lot of different projects as we move forward. So that's all we have. We're happy to answer any questions.
I have a question. Are you going to start using this as a review that goes into your reports each time? Like, have a walkability index score?
Yes, we hope to use this in instances in which we can incorporate it to help provide context and information. You may recall some months ago, I believe it was back in December, you had a conditional use on bars, and as part of that presentation, there was a walkability analysis. That's an example of how we can incorporate and will continue to incorporate this data.
Great, thanks.
So, are you familiar with Reed Ewing's work at the University of Utah?
Generally, yeah.
Okay. The components of walkability don't just include destinations, as you sort of imply when you bring up the cover of land of trees. They also include how you're using 15-minute circles as if you could go in a straight line, which you cannot when you walk. You have to go through the streets, and sometimes things take a longer time because there are bigger blocks and less. So a place becomes less walkable the larger the blocks are. And so even though Sugar House Center, in the center of Sugar House, is close to all the amenities, it's not necessarily walkable as it could be, because it has very big blocks and it's very car dominated as an environment. So Reed Ewing's scientific research has been going on over 20 years now, defines walkability in 4 dimensions. And so that's something, one of them is access to services, but rather than call this a walkability analysis, this is on GIS, right? Right, it's part of the city's GIS system. So it is an access to amenities or access to specific uses that are helpful in a community. Places like the avenues, for example, it doesn't matter if I'm 4 blocks from that grocery store. I am not going to carry 4 bags of heavy groceries up that hill. you know? So one of the things needs to be obviously some kind of, and there is in the GIS that slope analysis. So one of the walkability, we have, the real estate community has a walkability index, and we don't know what that is because it's proprietary, right? So whatever elements are in it, we don't know. But we do have, right here at the University of Utah, one of the foremost experts on walkability in the world. So one of the things I would ask you to do before you come back with this is to just show this to him. I'm sure he's I'd be happy to make that connection if you want, but I'm sure he's very happy to look at it with you and suggest maybe some tweaks to it, but also to see how we can use the city's current GIS system to really have a walkability index. On the other hand, what you're doing is fine, because what you've done is to analyze where these important destinations are. Access to specific destinations is one of the, I don't know whether it's 4 or 5 Ds that he uses now, but that is a very important and very difficult task to have done. And since it's already in the city's system, it's just a matter of sort of putting the right ones together, I think, to get a true walkability index versus just access to amenities, which is what you're doing now. So that's just, I mean, I think what you've done and with the records and stuff is great. I just don't want to call it a walkability index until we really understand what are the components of walkability.
I can maybe talk to some of the points you made. I do think, and Noah might know more, but we did use I think the trails and sidewalks layers to make the walk sheds. So it's not just a circle. It, depending on the accuracy
But the
of the
indexes
layers.
that have been tested are tested by percentage of importance. And so, I mean, I'm just
Sure.
saying that there's,
Yes.
it looks like you have most of the data you need. It's just a matter of how do we qualify it? How do we consider this as important or not? And some things, of course, are only important for a planning decision, like where a school might go or something. On the other hand, if you really are asking those kids to walk up 9 blocks in the avenues, that's not so walkable. So there are certain things that aren't on flat land or aren't next to a transit or where it doesn't matter what 15-minute circles you draw. It's actually 45 minutes to get from here to there because of the street network. Those are part of what we can do to really understand that. Now, that may be well beyond what we want to do here, depending on the purpose of it. But that's why I would just consult with him. He's happy to talk to you, I'm sure.
I'm going to add just real quick, our intent with this tool is to be something that we continue to always develop and look at. And so, for example, one of the things that our GIS experts in the city are working on right now is adding the actual tree canopy shape, which gives us an idea of how comfortable sidewalks may be and walking may be. And so we're happy to talk to anyone about it because we want to know what data we can add, how we would go about doing that and everything else. But the intent is this is a ever-evolving tool for us to make planning related, not just land use planning, but lots of other things too. So yeah, thank you for the input, and we'll gladly talk to Reed Ewing about how we can go about doing that and expanding the tool so it's even more useful.
It's also an issue of updating the data that you have. I mean, especially with land uses, those are very flexible. Well, on the other hand, streets are pretty much where they are.
Yeah, what's great about this is it's tied to all of our existing data that comes in through Acela, so it's automatically updated. We have to truth some of that because for example, it uses business license codes and stuff like that, so we have to make sure that it's still capturing everything. But it is a live tool. So.
And don't get me wrong, I think this is really great work. I just want to make sure that we're not calling it a walkability thing when it's really much more of a access to particular amenities, what you're calling amenities, which is great, but it's not anywhere near the whole picture of walkability.
I was just going to add a little bit. For what it's worth, the walk sheds we use do account for slope. So when we were calculating these walk sheds, kind of the ideal on flat terrain, perfect grid system is an ideal diamond. So it may not be as easy to tell with the walkable SLC grocery store shed because they're all consolidated. But if you were to look at the individual walk shed for the avenues, for example, you would see it's shorter in the north when you're going up more versus going down. So it is sort of accounted for. It's a bit minute, and it doesn't necessarily, how comfortable is this on my joints per se, but it is a factor that's been integrated in the sense that how long will this journey take, things like that. So it's an element already to an extent. It doesn't assume a flat plane.
Well, I'm concerned that we have, if you do something like that, it should be transparent when a person uses the database that you're producing, that you have done these not with a strict 15-minute, but you've taken, how you took slope into account, how you took block size into account. Those sort of things should just be transparent. I think that here's a grocery store, there's a grocery store is a very useful thing to have all by itself, without the 15-minute circles around it. So, but I just think that we need to be thoughtful about misleading people about everything. Everything should be out there.
I think that, I'm really excited just to poke around it myself, and just like hearing about normal people that are not in planning that are like interested in things like walkability or tree canopy. I love that there is a thing that I can be like, there's a thing constantly being updated that is easily accessible. They don't need to buy ArcGIS to be able to understand some of these elements. So I think that you've taken an expensive, complicated product and simplified it into a way that's accessible to your layperson, and so that's extremely commendable. My first thought was, whenever I was thinking about it, was how do I get download some of this stuff though? So how do I put it into my own file and then take some of just do some comparative stuff? I was thinking about your the kind of stuff we were talking about last week with how much can fit on a lot and in the SR 30-45 zone stuff. Do you guys foresee using this kind of stuff on top of things like non-compliance in a neighborhood by side yard setbacks that create an amount of density, or is there that's not a super clear question. Is it a clear enough question for you?
I think I understand you're asking, are we able to use the data to identify those lots which have non-compliances, and because of those non-compliances, they are denser than they otherwise would be?
Yeah, and therefore you can overlay your walkability map and say okay, we've already got this walkability map with all of these amenities, overlaying our knowledge of the density layer. Is there a correlation or whatever? But I guess you already have a density number, but I even want to get more granular of side yard setbacks of how is that interplaying with walkability in a neighborhood or whatever. So I just mostly I commend you. I think that's great. I think it's really incredible. It triggers me to want more. But there's so much here that is just going to be great to comb through. So, yeah.
I remember the bar walkability map from that application that you're talking about, and I thought it was really interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing more analysis like that when we see projects going forward. And it's really, I was going to ask how often it's updated, and it's live. That's crazy. That seems really cool.
Some of the data is live. Some of it, for example, the density, we update that twice a year as new developments get their certificates of occupancy. So we do that in June, and then we do it again in January. So there's some lapse in that kind of thing, but that's the nature of construction. And then with the business license data, there's a lag too, because the city isn't always notified when a business closes, right? There's no obligation for them to tell the city they're closing. It's just usually when their business license comes up for renewal. That's when we figure that out. So, it's live-ish as best that we can get it.
I like it.
So is the city's GIS data generally available for public on a website where we can access all the layers?
Not all of it, because some of
Okay.
it is protected. For example, we don't put our water information out to the public because we don't want people to know where they can access our water supply.
Right.
But the city does have a public GIS page where people can download all kinds of data. I think long-term, our goal is to have all this data to be able to be open source for people to use, provided we can make sure that we're protecting some of the info in those layers that needs to be protected.
Well, that's why I'm concerned. If you offer the walkability layer as the thing, instead of suggesting that if you want to see how walkable a place is, look at these four layers and put them together, and that gives you more data, or some way in which we define it a little, so that people, if you just want to look at all the things that are walkable around you. Thinking from a perspective of an individual citizen using this information versus the planning commission or the planning staff itself, or real estate developers or housing developers. So I think it's sort of, I just know that the data is granular enough to do this, and it's just a matter of combining it in the right combinations. And
Yeah, so-
a layperson would not necessarily know what those are.
Right.
Is all as I'm saying.
Yeah, and we'll take all of that kinds of stuff into consideration as we evolve the tool.
As someone who did GIS in a prior career and is still very much a GIS geek, I'm very impressed and happy to see that the city is not just created this, but also has a plan for keeping it updated. So, yes, great work.
I'm going to echo all the comments that were made earlier. It is great work, and I have stared at a lot of data maps in cities, and I'm glad to hear that some of it, and the goal will be an open data sort of portal for this stuff. Question I had I think on the last slide at the top, there was I think you hinted at it maybe, but trying to figure out, like, you were showing housing density, and I was thinking about the walkability map overall, and it's walkability from just a general point, right? But I think the housing density is a point, but also residential in general, right? Is there any residential in the area, right? So if you're showing the area as walkable, is it walkable from a certain place, right? And I think understanding that layer and what's there might help reuse in the future. If I'm looking at redeveloping a certain place or lot or different spaces, is it in a walkable area, and is there a lack of housing there, a lack of other housing density there, right? And that helps show it and I think you were getting at it with this here, but I was trying to figure out how it would work overall as a layer. So, but good work overall.
One example that we had prepared but we cut was your consent agenda item from earlier today. We did that exact analysis where we had the subject site for that consent agenda. It's right by the tracks and front runner. And we showed you can, I wish I had it to pull up, but we did basically exactly that. If you pull up that site from the item that you approved on your consent agenda, it's in a highly walkable area with access to almost every amenity. But then when you layer on the housing layer and click on the site, you'll see that it's significantly less developed than the surrounding blocks. And so it's exactly what you were saying. That can help you understand, like, oh, this is a great location. People would be happy to live here. They would have access to all of the amenities that they need for a good life. And it's a spot with lower density than the surroundings. So it would be appropriate for a new development.
Except that is exactly the illustration that also causes my concern, because that is it's almost a landlocked site. To get to the tracks, you have to go around and around and around and around. It's like a half a mile, or a mile. It's not, the short walk that it seems on a map, because it's got tracks on one side, the train on one side and the highway on the other side, and both of the site actually dead ends on both sides. So it's like not a walkable place at all.
Yeah,
So
I
I
want to
can-
echo that when you were using that as an example, that site is extremely hard to even get to in your car. Like it took me driving around a bit to get to go visit it. That's not a walkable.
Which is why it's probably not been developed.
Not been developed. It's that I don't feel like that's got a lot of walkability to it because of the physical aspects of it. So I think that's an important distinction that Commissioner Scheer made. And if you haven't been there, if you hadn't physically been there and seen it, I think most people wouldn't have appreciated the obstacles that are present if you were on foot. So, yeah, I think there are other components to walkability that may be really difficult to hone in on for specific sites, but physical obstacles are real in a lot of the communities that we have, and some way to incorporate those. Slope is one of them, train tracks are another, highways are another, and walking beyond those highways is not always easy either. So I think there's a lot of components to that type of a question that would be helpful to incorporate if we were going to use this as an index in order to review part of a review for projects, but also for the community to just get on there and look at. There are a lot of, that site has got a lot of issues for walkability that I don't think just putting a density housing is going to make it walkable at all, because it's out of their control. But that's just an example that I think highlights exactly what Commissioner Scheer was bringing up.
So I think maybe to help, kind of like how I like to look at, for example, this situation here is, it's not just showing, here's where people live, and it's also showing, here's where the amenities are. So we can see kind of like a quadrant, people are here and there are amenities here. There are people here, there are no amenities. There are amenities here, but there are no people. So like with this example, we can see there are a ton of people in sort of this Lower Avenues Federal Point area, but there are no amenities there. So if we look at the zoning map, we can see, well, there's a lot of residential zoning here, which does not allow by law amenities to go there. So if we can't bring amenities there, we can't make it a more comfortable area for people to get to those amenities. So that adds to the uncomfortableness to it. So this is not just, showing where the people are or where the amenities are, but showing where the amenities aren't, where the people aren't, and how those interact.
Exactly. I think we have zoning obstacles, like you just mentioned, and physical obstacles that there are a lot of obstacles that are at play here. So if we were going to take that particular parcel as an example, though, if we are simply just like a walkability index as its relationship to amenities in terms of a distance it looks great. But when you get there, you're like, well, I can't get to the train unless I go out and around and then up North Temple and then over the train tracks and then back down. So it's not as simple as it looks on the map sometimes. And then we do have obstacles via zoning, depending on the zoning type, what is allowed in those zoning areas. And that does limit amenities. And that's very true. So I just think the dynamic of those relationships is kind of all over the place.
So I'm going to give another example of how we've actually used this tool to address that exact same thing that you're talking about, is that we met with a developer and UTA last week about around the 1300 South track station. Because from the platform, the only access point west is on 1300 South, which is a very unpleasant pedestrian experience. So we've actually been working with both UTA and that developer to build an extension of the crosswalk on the north end of that to access Lucy Avenue. And what that does is that it opens access to what has been approved of 1,800 housing units on 2 blocks that suddenly have a very safe, convenient, and quick and shorter ability to access the track station. That improves walkability. That's how this tool is intended to be used. It's not just land use, it's not just walkability. It is, where are we growing as a city, and what are the issues in those areas? What's needed? How do we align our capital improvement projects with those things so that we can improve walkability, access to other modes of transportation, which in turn ends up making it so maybe people don't spend so much money on a private car, or our air quality improves, or we know where to plant trees. So those are all things how this tool is intended to be used. It's not a end-all be-all of walkability tools, but it gives us a lens to analyze it so we can identify those exact types of things that have been brought up.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll watch for your fancy maps in our reports going forward. Okay, thank you. Our next item is the annual report for the Planning Division.
There we go. So this is, as you all know, we're required to provide an annual report to the Planning Commission and City Council on activities within the Planning Division that include the Planning Commission. And so I wanted to recap what that, just some of the things that happened last year. Some of these things are things that the Planning Commission sees, some of them are not. But I'm going to start with who we are. You know, you see a lot of our planners, but there's a good number of our team that you never see. We have 42 full-time employees in the Planning Division. I know might be a little hard to read, but there's teams that never come to our commissions because of what they do in the background. So we have a support staff that obviously you know half of that team because you see them one of them every other meeting. But maybe what you didn't know is that we actually have a graphic design team too that actually produces how all of our documents look, our website, et cetera. So they take our work and make it look good and digestible for people. And then we have our 6 different planning teams that all have a different focus area. On the right-hand side of that, the development and review team, these are the people who do all the zoning reviews for building permits, business licensing, et cetera. The rest of the people on here you see with some regularity. So our admin team, I've already gone over some of this, but these are all the things they do. They're clearly an integral part of us being allowed to function. Without them, we wouldn't. But you know the things that they do that help you. They also help us manage our records. They do our website maintenance. They also support us in how we spend our money and our budget. One thing I wanted to highlight is that map and that whole presentation that you just saw, that was initially funded with $100,000 from the city council. We decided we could do it in-house, and we saved the city $100,000 because of that. No, it goes into the general
So
fund.
these guys
where
are
it can-
free?
Where it could, no, their salary's paid anyway, but that was to basically go find a consultant to do this, but we worked with our GIS experts in other departments to come up with it. The planning counter, these are people, this is usually the first point of contact with the public. So these are the people who come in to ask questions, submit applications. These are just some of the stats that the people who occupy the planning counter and help people out accomplished last year. So when you look at those numbers, some of them may seem small, but the planning counter people, the team, they're the ones who fill a very critical role in applications, is that they are determining when an application is complete, which sounds trivial, but it's actually a very statutorily required step, because that starts to trigger all of our timelines. And this is the team that's responsible for that. The development review team, so this is a team of a total of 6 people. Last year, they reviewed over 4,400 building permits that they did the zoning reviews on. Those range everything from someone who's building a fence to building a 40-story building. So they run the gamut. And then they also manage what's called the development review team meetings. So these are representatives from every single department that are involved in the review process. They get together with applicants who can make appointments to hear high-level basic comments. What rules are going to apply? What showstoppers there may be? Things like that. And our office is the office that manages that. Last year we had 941 applications, which is almost average for the last whatever that is, 16 years. The diagram breaks it down by categories. These categories are how everything comes in and are classified in our management program. So this is how we keep track of everything. Last year we had 7 appeals filed, so 4 of those were appeals of staff decisions, 2 landmarks commissions and 1 planning commission. We're not going to get into those, just to give you an idea. One thing I will note, that 10 years ago we had 3 or 4 times the number of appeals that we do now. So we are making much better, much more sound decisions collectively than we were 10 years ago. Part of that is because of the effort of our staff, but also the effort of the Planning Commission and Landmarks Commission to really think through when we're making decisions. Historic preservation applications are actually the largest block of applications that we receive, but most of these are approved over the counter. They submit them over the counter. It's electronic these days, but they submit them usually within that same day. A planner is grabbing it, reviewing it, and approving it. The Landmarks Commission themselves don't actually see a lot of development applications. So last year they saw a total of 19. Most of those are major alterations, but all new construction has to go through the Landmarks Commission. Most of those are things where they've demolished a non-contributing building and are proposing a new one. So the Planning Commission, you guys also had a pretty typical, I'd say, number of agenda items. You actually reviewed more agenda items last year than you did the year before. Yeah. But if you remember last year when we had a retreat, one of the things we talked about was the meeting length. Even though we reviewed more agenda items. The average meeting length was 20 minutes less, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that was skewed by one meeting that we all know went till like 12:30. So, and the average length of each agenda item was down 4 minutes. Subdivisions are also a big block of what we do. You don't see most of these. Most of these things are approved at a staff level. We're one of the few cities in Utah that actually approves subdivisions at the staff level. There's a few others that do, but most of them have to go to planning commission. Some of them even have to go to the city councils. So this is just an example of, this was a lot consolidation plat, map, I guess it's not really a plat. Just to give you an idea of how complicated these things can be. This was a subdivision that was recorded before Utah was a state, and over the years had all kinds of changes to it. We had to figure out how to fix all this stuff. So this is one of the big things that our planners do in conjunction with the attorney's office. One of our teams also does zoning administrations. The biggest aspect of this really is, even though zoning verification letters show up as a really big number there, those are fairly simple to do. They're basically things that people ask for to verify that their use of their property, the buildings, are legal. But we do a lot of interpretations on non-conforming, especially buildings in the city, because probably half the buildings built in Salt Lake City were built before we have anything remotely close to our current zoning. And so a lot of them don't comply and are considered non-complying. And so we deal with a lot of, this is an example in the avenues of a building that was clearly built as a mixed-use project when it was erected, that was zoned residential, and they went, I think it was converted to a single-family home, and then over the years it's gone back and forth between adding 2 units or adding 3 units. But I use this picture because it's in the same zone as the home next to it, but clearly doesn't meet any of the SR1A zoning regulations. So we have to review those things if somebody wants to make any change to that property. We had 120 applications that had to go through the 45-day public engagement period. We call those online open houses. They also get presented to community councils and things like that. This, I think, was the highest number of views that we've had since we've done this. We made this change during the COVID years, but we had over 13,000 views of those open house items collectively. Some of the accomplishments, this is just to refresh your memory, but I think what's impressive about this are the huge items that were either adopted or sent to the city council in the last year. And these are all things that came through the city council or through the planning commission, and you'll recognize all of these, but we've done everything from establishing community benefit requirements for general plan and zoning map amendments, to updating landscaping, to writing a whole new subdivision code. And then you can see the other things that we've transmitted and are in progress as well. It's a big year as far as policy related changes. In fact, I think it's probably, I've been with the city since 2007, and this was definitely the most significant year of code improvements that we've done in those 18 years. On deck for this year, we have a number of big items. Some of these you have already started to see, and probably there's 4 really big projects on here that you haven't started to see yet. One of those is we're mandated under state law to link land use planning with water planning. So we have to update our general plan to do that. We're in the process of drafting that, and we're going to be coming to you over the next several months with some, first with some basic information about how water's used in the city, and some findings of our analysis of that data, and then what that means for policies. We've done things somewhat backwards in the city in that we've already adopted in our development regulations a lot of the things that the state requires us to do. So water-wise landscaping is really the big one. And so we were already compliant with a lot of those things. We've put caps on individual uses, how much water they can use on a daily basis, and things like that. The other one, the expanding housing choices, is that R1 study that the council initiated, and then we are updating 3 community plans this year. So we haven't updated a community plan since, I think, the East Bench plan in 2017 or 18. So the Northwest plan, the Avenues plan, and the Capitol Hill plan. And we're doing the Avenues is the oldest plan we have, followed by Northwest. And because the Avenues and Capitol Hill are so intrinsically tied just with the nature of development, we're doing an update there as well. And that is all I had for that. Happy to entertain any questions if you have any.
Well done.
Good work. I, of course, am very excited to see the housing choice in residential neighborhoods. Do you know when, like how that process is going to look and how long it's going to take and what's the kind of, tell me more.
Yeah, so we're drafting that work plan that will answer those questions for us. We're not sure at this point. A lot of it depends on how broad that ends up becoming. But the work plan will identify what that process looks like, how many staff resources we need to put to it, where, when, and where, and how long that public engagement period is, what happens if we have to pivot through that. So that's all to come.
Okay, cool. And then just one more tiny one. I saw the CRA district, Rio Grande. So is that's the area between the Rio Grande station and the Frontrunner station?
Correct.
And that will come through us because of a zone change, or what?
It's an amendment to the downtown plan and a zoning change. So if the downtown plan actually has a section about the development of what then was called, I can't remember, the Depot District project or something like that, which was really the CRA, formerly the RDAs, mostly the land owned by the RDA, or now CRA, in that 2-block area. Mm-hmm. And so they went through a pretty extensive public process with the CRA board to adopt a strategic plan on how to implement that. One of those steps is to update, or is to upzone that area so that development can be, I guess, more transit oriented and denser than what the current zoning would allow.
Okay, great, thanks.
The annual report had a lot of information. I didn't know that how the groups were separated and their different focus. I'm always impressed with the amount of professionalism and skill and that your group presents to us. I'm always impressed with that. I think we've got a really good planning division in this city, so that's nice to be part of that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, we have one more item on our agenda, and that's a leave of absence request. Commissioner McCall Christensen has asked for a 6-month leave of absence. She has a new job that's taking a lot of time, and she's not able to spend the time that she wants to on the Planning Commission, but she would like to maintain connection to it and come back in 6 months. So in order to do that, it's the Planning Commission hasn't done it for a long time, but has in the past provided leave of absences when requested. So if someone wants to make a motion for that, and then we'll vote on it, and it's just majority decides.
I actually had, I think, one of the last of those back in 2018 or something, when I went away for 6 months. I move that we approve Commissioner McCall Christensen's application for leave of absence.
I'll second that.
Can we clarify that it's for 6 months?
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Thank you. So that's a motion by Commissioner Scheer and a second by Commissioner Mike Christensen. Any discussion? Okay, Commissioner Krasik,
Yes.
Commissioner Scott,
Yes.
Commissioner Barry,
Yes.
Commissioner Leverett,
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer,
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen,
Yes.
and I also vote yes. So that's unanimous to grant a 6-month leave of absence for Commissioner McCall Christensen. So that's it for our agenda. I want to notice that the weather is so good and kids are out walking around on our streets. So be so careful when you're driving on our streets to pay attention to students and other kinds of pedestrians. Thank you. That's it.